Arlen stood on the rocky shore, the sound of waves crashing gently against the island's cliffs filling the cool night air. The moon hung low, casting an ethereal glow over the Isle of Silence. He held the slumbering boy tightly in his arms, his heart heavy with the weight of their harrowing escape. Before him rose the imposing silhouette of the House of Mirrors, the secretive enclave where the Seer resided. As he approached the grand gates, the intricate carvings on the stone walls glistened under the moonlight, telling stories of Meridia's ancient past. Arlen's grip tightened around the box containing the moonstone, the key to their audience with the Seer. He stepped forward, presenting the box to the guards who, recognizing the symbol, allowed him entry without question. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and the soft murmur of whispered prayers. Arlen and the boy were quickly separated. Each led down different winding corridors adorned with tapestries depicting the Covenant's storied history. Arlen alone continued through the maze of hallways until he finally arrived at the Seer's chamber. He was ushered into a vast room, dimly lit by candles, where the Seer, a regal woman of undeniable presence, awaited him. The Seer, known as Lady Seraphina, was the head of the order, a covenant for the most elite young women of Meridia, trained in the ways of politics, diplomacy, and magic to become the perfect matches for the dukes and elites of Meridia. Her silver hair flowed like a river of moonlight over her shoulders, and her eyes, deep and knowing, fixed upon Arlen with a piercing intensity. The Seer's voice cut through the silence, a melodic whisper that seemed to resonate with the very walls. "What brings you to my sanctuary at such an hour?" Arlen bowed deeply, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I come seeking refuge for the boy I brought with me. Please, what have you done with him since our arrival?" The Seer's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze piercing. "The boy is exhausted from his ordeal. He is being fed and allowed to rest. He is safe here for now. Who are you and how did you come to possess the lunar veil amulet you carry? And be warned, if you lie, I will know." Arlen swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. "My name is Arlen. I was given this box by Lady Elara. I'm nothing but a humble servant entrusted with her son's care. She believed this was the only place where he could be safe." Lady Seraphina's expression remained skeptical, her gaze intense. What happened to Elara? She wouldn't have given up her son unless something terrible had happened to her. Arlen took a deep breath. "Our home was attacked by reavers, but these were reavers like no others. They wielded magic beyond anything I've ever encountered. Their forms seemed to flicker in and out of the shadows, moving with an unnatural grace and power. Lady Elara was desperate, I could see it in her eyes. She knew she couldn't run away. I fear the worst. I don't believe they survived. Will you honor my lady's dying wish and ensure his safety?" Seraphina's gaze turned somber. "Arlen, you must understand this place is not meant for boys. The best I can offer is to have one of our servant girls care for him as her own. He will not be part of the Covenant, but he will be safe. I offer this because of my great regard for Elara." Arlen bowed his head, accepting the Seer's decision with a heavy heart. "Thank you, Lady Seraphina. Your kindness will not be forgotten." Seraphina rose from her seat, her presence commanding and ethereal. "Now, Arlen, you cannot stay. This sanctuary is for the young heirs of Meridia. You have done your duty. It is time for you to continue your journey. Know that the boy will be looked after." Arlen nodded, his resolve firm. "I understand. Please take care of him. He is all that remains of his family." With a final bow, Arlen placed the trinket on Lady Seraphina's desk and turned to walk away, the weight of his mission still pressing heavily upon his shoulders. As he left the House of Mirrors, he looked back one last time, hoping that within its enigmatic walls, the boy would find safety and perhaps one day a purpose. The night air was crisp as Arlen descended the path back to the shore, each step taking him further from the sanctuary. The boy's future was now intertwined with the secrets and promises of the House of Mirrors, and Arlen could only hope that Lady Seraphina's words held true. 3 years had passed since Vashiel was brought to the House of Mirrors, and the sanctuary that had once promised safety had become a place of suffering. Vash, now 10, had grown taller and leaner from the relentless chores assigned to him. As a helping hand, he was constantly at the beck and call of the students and instructors, performing menial tasks that left him exhausted and despondent. The serene halls that echoed with the knowledge and training of elite young women held a darker side for Vash. The older students, with their growing mastery of magic, often used him as an unwitting subject for their spells. One afternoon, while he was scrubbing the marble floors of the grand hall, a group of students approached, their laughter echoing ominously. "Hey, Vash," called out Leora, a senior student with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Come here, we want to show you something." Vash hesitated, knowing well the consequences of ignoring a direct summons. He stood and walked over, his head bowed. Leora and her friends, Arya and Celine, encircled him, their wands at the ready. "We've been practicing a new spell," Leora said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hold out your hand." Reluctantly, Vash extended his hand. Leora whispered an incantation, and a thin, fiery line appeared on his skin, searing into him with a painful intensity. He winced but bit back a cry, refusing to give them the satisfaction. "Oops," Leora said mockingly. "Did that hurt? We were just playing." The trio laughed and walked away, leaving Vash clutching his burned hand. Tears of frustration and pain welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He couldn't afford to show weakness here. Later that evening, he sat in a small alcove tending to his wound. Mistress Eveline, the woman assigned to oversee his care, found him there. She was a kind-hearted woman, her face lined with the wisdom of years, and her demeanor gentle despite the rigid environment. "Vash," she said softly, kneeling beside him and examining his hand. "What happened?" He hesitated before responding, his voice barely above a whisper. "The older students, they were practicing a spell." Eveline sighed, a mix of sorrow and anger in her eyes. She fetched a salve from her apron and began to gently apply it to his burned skin. "I'm so sorry, Vash. You don't deserve this." As she worked, Vash's defenses crumbled and tears streamed down his face. "I hate it here," he choked out. "I barely remember my life before, but I know it was better than this. I remember my mother and father. They loved me. I felt safe." Eveline paused, her eyes meeting his. "I know it's hard, Vash. Life here can be cruel, but you are stronger than you know. Your parents would be proud of how brave you are." Her words were a balm to his wounded spirit, but they could not quell the growing desire to leave. As she finished bandaging his hand, Vash made a decision. That night, as Vash lay on his small cot, the weight of his decisions pressed heavily upon him. The ceiling above seemed to trap his thoughts, reflecting the turmoil within. The faint sounds of the sea, echoing through the stone walls, were a constant reminder of the world beyond the House of Mirrors. For most, this place was a sanctuary of knowledge and power, but for Vash, it had become a prison. His resolve to leave had been growing silently in his heart. The once promised sanctuary had morphed into a living nightmare, each day blurring into a cycle of endless chores and subtle torments. His spirit, once vibrant, now cried out for freedom. He had waited patiently, his every action masked in careful compliance, until the perfect moment presented itself. It was a moonless night. The sky, heavy with the promise of rain, concealed his impending escape. Vash knew this was his chance. The darkened sky would cloak his departure, and the silence of the night would mask his movements. With his few belongings wrapped in a small bundle, he quietly rose from his bed. Among his possessions was a precious trinket, a necklace fashioned by Eveline from his mother's keepsake. It was a tangible connection to a past he was desperate to reclaim. As he crept through the silent halls, Vash's thoughts were a tumult of memories and hopes. He took one last look at the House of Mirrors, a place that had been both a sanctuary and a torment. The cool night air greeted him as he stepped outside, the darkness wrapping around him like a comforting shroud. He inhaled deeply, feeling a flicker of hope amidst his fear. Vash's destination was uncertain, but the need to find a place where he could live freely, without the shadows of his past or the torment of his present, was undeniable. With a final glance back, he turned and walked away from the House of Mirrors, each step towards an unknown future filled with a growing sense of liberation. The docks, eerily quiet in the stillness of the night, awaited him. The gentle lapping of water against the wooden pilings was the only sound. Vash moved stealthily, his heart pounding in his chest. His experience with the sea was limited to unloading supplies from the ships that docked there, and he had only glimpsed the horizon in passing. Rowing and navigating were skills he had observed but never practiced. Approaching the line of small boats tied to the dock, Vash selected one that seemed sturdy. Quietly he untied it, casting a nervous glance over his shoulder. The buildings of the House of Mirrors loomed in the darkness, their windows like watchful eyes. Vash climbed into the boat, careful not to make any noise. He grabbed the oars, their weight unfamiliar and awkward in his hands. He had watched the sailors many times, had seen how they moved the oars through the water, but doing it himself felt clumsy. He pushed off from the dock, the boat drifting silently into the dark waters. He rowed with determination, his strokes uneven and hesitant at first, but growing stronger as he found a rhythm. He didn't know where the shore was or how far he would have to go. He only knew the direction from which the ships came, and he aimed the boat that way, hoping it would lead him to freedom. The sea around him was a vast, unknowable expanse, the horizon hidden by the darkness. Each stroke of the oars took him further from the island, but doubt gnawed at him. He was just a boy, with limited experience in the water, venturing into the unknown. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving, but he kept rowing, driven by a desperate hope. Hours passed and exhaustion began to set in. His arms ached, his back throbbed, and his hands were blistered from the rough wood of the oars. But he didn't stop. The fear of being caught and dragged back to the House of Mirrors was stronger than the pain. He focused on the rhythm, the steady dip and pull, the faint splash as the oars cut through the water. At last, just as the first light of dawn began to tinge the sky, Vash saw the faint outline of the shore. Relief and exhaustion swept over him, but he pushed through, rowing until the boat scraped against the sandy beach. He stumbled out, his legs weak and unsteady, but his heart soaring with the thrill of freedom. He had no idea where he was or what lay ahead, but it didn't matter. For the first time in 3 years, Vash was free from the torment of the House of Mirrors. He looked back at the sea, the island a distant silhouette, and turned towards the unknown, ready to face whatever came next.